From the New Rochelle TV studios here in New Rochelle, New York, this is the Progressive News Network, Voices from the Grassroots of Westchester. Hello, I'm Howard Horowitz, your host for today's show. Welcome to our broadcast. For those not familiar with Progressive News Network, our programs are taped live in studios right here in New Rochelle and also in White Plains. Our focus is on the economic, political, and social issues affecting all working people and all the diverse communities of Westchester, and on what grassroots advocates, activists, and people can do to address these issues. You can find out more about our network on the web at www.pnn.org. Today, on March 6, 2025, we speak with Dr. Rosa Rivera-McCutchen, a New Rochelle resident and professor at Hunter College, the School of Education of the City of New York. She is here to talk to us about public education and the work of the grassroots New Rochelle Community Committee for our public schools. Professor Rivera-McCutchen, I want to welcome you again to the Progressive News Network, Voices from the Grassroots of Westchester. Can you tell us a bit about your background and your experience as an educator and in educational leadership?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm really happy to be here. So I've been an educator for over 20 years. I started out as a high school teacher in the Bronx and then went on to earn my doctorate and have been a professor in higher education, working first at Lehman College for many years and now at Hunter College, primarily working to educate and prepare aspiring school leaders who are interested in leading traditional public schools and beyond. So I have a pretty deep history in public school education.
And I understand you're also an author.
Yes, so I am the author of Radical Care, Leading for Justice in Urban Schools. And essentially what I advance in the book is a framework for how school leaders, and I actually think of leadership in a broad sense, how school leaders can really advance equity, starting with the foundation of anti-oppressive and anti-racist work, building out to developing critically authentic relationships with communities and thinking about how to leverage their leadership, their power, their positional authority to ensure that everyone in the school is achieving excellence, is achieving their maximum potential, from the students to the educators to the staff and to themselves. And so that is Radical Care. That's the framework that I've advanced.
Oh, I was going to ask you, so that is your definition of radical care.
Radical Care is a 5-part framework, and it does, as I said, it starts with an anti-racist practice and anti-racist sort of mindset, which really becomes the foundation for all of the work, right? So if you begin with this anti-oppressive mindset, then you really have an understanding of how systemic oppression, historical oppression has really shaped the way systems have been organized. And that can begin to sort of unlock the potential for how you build relationships with communities that you're serving in authentic ways. And once that happens, then you can really begin to leverage those relationships to ensure that people are achieving their best, are reaching for their best, that you have high expectations for yourself, for the adults, for the students, and that you're really ensuring that you're using your power to advocate for good, to advocate for change, to advocate for justice, and finally to really tap into a spirit of what researchers have called radical hope, which is a deep, sort of profound belief in what is possible. So that is Radical Care, and it's something that it really has shaped my work. Whether I knew it at the time, the framework was part of my teaching ethos and continues to be part of how I live my life, my work in education and beyond.
Well, thank you for that. And actually segueing directly to our topic, you live in New Rochelle and have children in the New Rochelle school system.
Yes.
So in light of your concept or paradigm of radical care, even if short of that, can you talk about your experiences right here in New Rochelle with your children?
Sure. So I have 3 children, as you said, or you may not have mentioned the number of kids, but I have 3 children, one of whom has already graduated from the school system and is currently away at college. The other two are still at they're in the high school. I also have a husband who's a teacher in New Rochelle at the high school, teaches social studies. So we're very much connected to the New Rochelle school systems. Our kids have attended schools essentially throughout, from kindergarten all the way through 12th grade. We have a strong commitment to public schools. By and large, our experiences have been very positive. Some of that, of course, I want to acknowledge has to do with the fact that we understand how to navigate. We are both educators. My husband and I are educators, and we understand how to engage with the school systems in ways that other community members might not be able to. But there is a strong commitment and a strong commitment to education of all students. There's a strong, just an incredible amount of resources in this city school district. And the opportunities that a kid can have going through all of the schools here in New Rochelle are really quite incredible, especially in comparison to some other public school systems. So we've had, by and large, a positive experience. Certainly there have been negative ones, and I think that is not uncommon, but I don't think that's necessarily unique to the New Rochelle City School District.
Mm-hmm. Sounds like it's a two-way street. School has to deliver, and
Absolutely.
We're encouraging parents to get involved.
Absolutely. I mean, we encourage parents to get involved, but another thing that, I mean, this is something that I do in my work preparing school leaders, is also to help schools, school leaders, school actors understand that sometimes the ways that parents engage are really signal a certain amount of privilege, right? And when parents are not engaged, that sometimes has something to do with how the systems are not open to the kinds of engagement that they are able to offer, that they have the capacity to offer. And so really it needs to be a partnership. And that true partnership really is about listening to what communities need and responding to those needs appropriately. So having community events that don't necessarily only happen, you know, a lot of times there's a lot of school activities that are during the day, and parents that are working and don't have the capacity or the resources or the wherewithal to take off, they can't do that, right? So really thinking, sort of expanding the way that we think about parent engagement beyond the traditional ways that really privilege some of us in the community who have the resources to be engaged in those ways.
And some of the points you just made about privilege and interaction and advantage and is a good segue to the core of our conversation this evening. So tell us what's going on in New Rochelle that a grassroots group called the New Rochelle Community Committee for our public schools was formed to take action for New Rochelle public schools. How did the group come into being, and why did it come into being?
Yeah, so at this point, you know, post-COVID, dates always are sort of fail most of us. But I guess about a year ago, around that time, an organization led by Dr. Steve Perry, Capital Prep, charter school organization, began the process of proposing a charter school be introduced into our community. And there was a widespread resistance to this charter school. And fundamentally, this group organized as a way to pull together resources and research and to educate the broader public about charter schools and about what the introduction of a charter school into the New Rochelle public school system, how that could be a threat to our community, how it can threaten the traditional public schools that are here, and how it can really undermine the academic prospects, primarily of communities of color and the low-income segments of our community. So that started, I guess, about a year ago or so. The timeline is escaping me, but this group of folks came together, and members of this committee really represent a broad. We have broad representation of the New Rochelle community, parents, educators, union members. The PTA council, so lots of different folks that are on this committee who really were committed to push back against this charter school.
All right, so it's clear that this group, this New Rochelle Community Committee is opposed to the charter school. Can you take just a brief moment, I want to get more into that, to tell our audience what is a charter school?
Yeah, that's really great. As an educator, sometimes one of the challenges we have is that we sort of get into our own heads, and we use language that is really not. We think that everybody is aware of this. Charter schools, very often, what you'll hear, and they are public schools, except that they're not truly public, right? They're sort of this mashup of public and private. That is to say that they take public dollars, but they operate in many other ways as private entities, right? They are not beholden to, in our city school district, right? So like many of the districts that surround New Rochelle, where you have a Board of Education and the city school district with its employees and its leadership, the superintendent, a charter school will siphon public dollars because the students from the community are attending a charter school, but they are not accountable in any way, shape, or form to those local entities. They're not accountable to the superintendent. They're not accountable to the Board of Education. There are some accountability metrics or testing, et cetera, that they have to sort of answer to at the state level, but they basically operate without any real oversight or accountability beyond what they say, right? Beyond what their board dictates, and because they get to shape their board. It is not a publicly elected board. They're appointed, they're asked to be on this. And so charter schools essentially really are sort of a drain on the public school system.
And you mentioned the name of the private entity that brought this to New Rochelle, called Capital Prep. So how does that come to be? How do they all of a sudden show up and say, we want your money, we're opening our own school?
Well, so in this case, it appears that they were invited in, right? And that tends to be the case, right? Is that there's someone or a group of people who are feeling disgruntled. And I want to take a moment to say that it's important to understand that one of the reasons that charter schools come into communities and that there's fertile ground for it is because that there is sometimes discontent, right? And there are circumstances where members of our community and their kids, their children, are not experiencing success in some way, shape, or another. So I don't want to necessarily sugarcoat and suggest that everyone has great success in the city school district of New Rochelle. That's not always the case. That said, I believe that our current Board of Education and the Board of Education that has been in place over the last number of years, our current superintendent, Dr. Corey Reynolds, who has also been with us for a bit and has just had his contract renewed, we are working, our district has actually been functioning quite well, and I believe is working actively to try to address any of the concerns that are coming up, including inequities in the outcomes of certain groups in our communities, African American students, Latinx students, right? So again, this is not, I want to just sort of lay that out.
Right.
But Capital Prep was invited in, I believe, by Reverend Holder into our community and by some other folks. And, they were introduced into the community and basically said, hey, we want to start a charter school here. And so Dr. Steve Perry, who is the founder of Capital Prep and who has a couple of other schools in Connecticut and one in Harlem and one in the Bronx, sort of jumped on it and has been, from the inception of that, began to essentially wage a campaign to get this charter school approved.
So I take it the committee, we're going to move on to another topic, but I take it the committee wants the money that would go to the charter school kept in and invested in the New Rochelle public schools for improvement and to get on a track to improve education and not detract from it.
Absolutely.
And I understand you've issued a report on this, a research-based report titled "The Struggle for Our Public Schools and Against the Charter Threat, the Case of New Rochelle." Can you share with us some of the findings and the story behind the report?
Yes, and the report is extensively researched, really well written. Dr. Elise Waterston really was the primary author and the force behind generating this report. She not only culled through lots of the public documentation. She also was able to foil a lot of the document from the state entity that
Freedom of
authorized
Information
the
Act.
Freedom of Information
get
Act.
reference Act, right.
That's right. Was able to get a lot of information that wasn't publicly available to really pull together this report. Essentially, I mean, there are a couple of things to just sort of highlight. It's an extensive report, and I do encourage people to take a look at it. And if I can remember the website, it's tinyurl.com/knowthefactsneuro. So that is,
and we'll link to your
Okay,
report on
perfect.
pnn.org.
perfect. Okay, so there are a couple of key points that come out of this. One is that Capital Prep was in their effort to encourage the community and to get support in the community. They made a lot of claims about the success of their existing charter schools. The sort of big takeaway from the research is that they are actually subpar to the New Rochelle public schools. Both their Connecticut locations as well as their New York State locations are really subpar. Capital Prep made claims about their graduation rate in comparison to our graduation rate. In particular, they highlighted the graduation rate of African American students and of Latinx students, and those claims are fundamentally false, right? So New Rochelle actually outperforms Capital Prep. So that's important. The other really important takeaway that you alluded to just before asking me this question is that there is a significant financial drain on the district when a charter school comes into being. Every child that attends that charter school, that money leaves the city school district and goes to the charter school. And even if that kid does not stay at the charter school, even if that child comes back into the traditional public school, if a kid leaves New Rochelle High School and goes to the charter school, if they come back November 15th into New Rochelle's high school, that money does not come back to the high school. So all of those funds go there. And again, I want to highlight that there isn't oversight, right? So how the money is spent, the accountability for all of that doesn't exist in the way that it does in our city school system. The other really key takeaway is that the organization that approved this is the SUNY Charter School Institute.
Which is up in Albany.
Which is up in Albany. It is the organization where charter schools go there and say, hey, we want to open a charter school. They're supposed to be an objective body where they're supposed to take into account the public desire and whether or not there's an interest in the charter school, a widespread interest. That organization and the way they conducted their meeting and their process was at best unethical, at worst really just deliberately misleading and really accepting of lies.
So the process itself was misleading, as well as the presentation that Capital Prep made was
Correct.
Misleading.
Correct.
And what about public support for this? What did they report, and what is the reality of public support for?
So there were a couple of really egregious claims that were made during the presentation of the Capital Prep votes. I should also note that the only people in the room with the SUNY Charter Institute board were Capital Prep people.
So SUNY
right?
is State University of New York, right?
Right.
That's what it
State
stands for?
University of New York Charter Schools Institute, who is the authorizing agency. They're the ones that say yes or no. The only people they invited to this meeting where this decision was made was Capital Prep, right? So our superintendent wasn't invited, and they also mischaracterized the amount of support that Capital Prep had. So in the report, you'll see that the numbers that were cited as being in opposition were astronomically lower than, in fact, what was actually recorded. I was at a town hall meeting where person after person after person got up and stood in opposition to the charter school, and that was really not represented in this meeting. You know, New Rochelle was sort of cast as this really failing and subpar school district.
So to get this passed, they disparaged the public school?
They absolutely did. So they disparaged, not only did they disparage the public school, the school system, but they explicitly disparaged the teachers, the educators that are in our school system, characterizing them as people who were sort of like second chance, who had failed elsewhere. So it was really a really egregious sort of show. And rather than really sort of pay attention to the public will here, the Charter School Institute and Capital Prep really mischaracterized what the actual reality is.
Right. So they made this presentation sort of in private, kind of secret to the SUNY governance body, and they granted it. So what happens now?
So there's a couple of things that where we are. So right now, I will say that the report that was again this brilliant, really informative report has been far-reaching, right? So a lot of folks, from our elected officials to the people that sort of sit on the Board of Education at the state level, right? So different regents, they're called the Board of Regents, different members of that body have read it. It has gone locally, and a lot of people have sort of a renewed interest and sort of outrage around not just the approval of this charter school, but the process by which it was approved. But the next steps really are pretty basic, right? It's a little bit out of our hands because and this is one of the flaws, is that there isn't a mechanism for our community to now fight back as a result of this decision. So the only way, at the moment anyway, is for us to ensure that people don't register for the school, right? So if there's no desire, the school will go away. If people don't register, then our dollars stay within the city school district.
So the parents and students here in New Rochelle have some agency.
They have some agency.
In other words, not so much political pleading, but don't buy it.
Correct. Don't buy it. Don't buy it. Don't buy in. And encourage your friends and neighbors to not to buy it as well. And I want to make the point, even if you don't have kids in the system, you are paying taxes, and your tax dollars are not going, if this charter school sort of continues to if it flourishes, if it does in fact open its doors, your tax dollars are going to that too.
All right. Anything else that people in our audience and the community can do?
Absolutely. Continue to write to the legislators, right? Continue to and say the process was flawed and we need recourse. We need to be able to impugn the process, but also we sort of demand some action or some response in reaction to our desires as a community.
Interesting. And so you're saying the public schools in this report, in their performance, et cetera, stand up well, and that what we're asking the audience to do actually has some basis in.
Absolutely, and I want to also highlight, another piece that's really important here is the immediate impact of this. So every year, when it's budget time, there is a challenge, right? There is more need than there are often dollars. And this year, the City School District of New Rochelle is facing a budget deficit in some part, because of the charter school, right? So that some of that money has to be held to the side in order to ensure that it gets siphoned off to the charter school, because that is the law. So again, making sure that we are having our voices heard, that we are correcting the errors of record about how the city school district is doing, and ensuring that our public schools can continue to thrive.
And what's the time frame? How long will it take them to open the school if they?
They are proposing to open this September.
And where will this be located?
So right now, to my knowledge, there is no building. They're opening a school without a school, as far as I know. It is not clear. The building that they had previously proposed was actually supposed to be for a private school, so that was rejected. So right now, here we are in March, They are opening, several grades. I can't remember how many grades, one in elementary and one in middle school and maybe one in high school. But right now, there is no actual building.
Wow, interesting, interesting. And so New Rochelle has to deal with this decision. The committee for the public schools obviously wants to work with the community at large to see to it that our public schools are protected, even in the face of this school opening. Can we broaden our perspective a little bit? And can you talk to us about the general threat to public education in the United States and the particular threat that charter schools, especially going forward with what we're hearing out of Washington, D.C., et cetera?
Yeah, the threat to public institutions is very real. I work at a public institution, certainly the K-12 schools under the current administration is under threat, what with book bans and other kinds of threats around withholding dollars if we don't comply. In New York State, that means, one thing. In Texas, it means another thing. But schools are under threat. Our ability to ensure that we are providing high quality education for all of our students is constantly something that is being threatened from the outside. And there is this massive push for privatization. I mean, charters are a form of privatization. There is a constant sort of narrative or discussion that what we need is competition, that if we actually have some competition, that that's going to actually raise the level. But in fact, time and time again, that doesn't prove to be true in the context of education. What it ends up looking like is the haves and the have-nots, and there are kids that get left in the traditional public schools who end up doing miserably because those schools get they just lose all of their resources.
Right. I'm getting this contrast between care, radical care and hope, and competition and profit.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
we'd like to keep the public and community in the schools.
Absolutely.
Rather than estrange it into some haves and have-nots.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Et cetera. Well, I want to thank you so much,
Thank you
Professor
for having me.
Rivera-McCutchen. It's been a real pleasure. And it's been extremely informative. And we want to see to it that people can get a copy of this report and take action. And we will link to it on www.pnn.org. And did you say that there's another link?
Yes. So the other link is tinyurl.com/knowthefactsnewrow. You can get it there.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining us again. And thank you to our audience for listening. And we'll see you soon. Good evening from the Progressive News Network, the voice of the grassroots of Westchester.
Thanks.
Thank you.